The billionaire had everything money could buy, yet every night he sat alone in a dark room, staring at the wheelchair that had become the symbol of everything he had lost. His mansion was enormous, his bank account seemed endless, and his name appeared in newspapers around the world. But none of it mattered anymore. Because when the doors of his bedroom closed, there was no applause, no business empire, and no crowd of people pretending to care. There was only silence, and a man who had convinced himself that nobody would ever stay. 3 years earlier, Daniel Sterling had been known as one of the most powerful businessmen in the country. At 46, he owned hotels, technology companies, and luxury apartment buildings. He traveled by private jet, attended charity galas, and rarely heard the word no. Then, one rainy evening, everything changed. His car crashed on a mountain road while returning from an important business meeting. Daniel survived, but the damage to his spine left him paralyzed from the waist down. The doctors told him recovery would be difficult, and perhaps he would never walk again. At first, Daniel fought with everything he had. He hired the best specialists, traveled to expensive rehabilitation centers, and spent fortunes on experimental treatments. But months turned into years, and the wheelchair remained beside him. Slowly, his determination turned into bitterness. Friends stopped visiting because Daniel's anger became unbearable. Business partners began communicating through assistants. Even his fiancée, who had once promised to stand beside him forever, eventually disappeared, leaving only a short message saying she could not live with the man he had become. If stories about second chances and unexpected kindness touch your heart, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness. Sometimes one small act of kindness can remind someone that their story is not over. Daniel became colder after that. He refused physical therapy. He threw medical equipment across rooms. He dismissed nurses for the smallest mistakes and insisted that nobody touch him unless absolutely necessary. His staff learned to keep their conversations short. His mansion became strangely quiet, even though dozens of employees worked there every day. Then a new nurse arrived. Her name was Emily Carter, a 32-year-old nurse who had spent most of her career caring for patients recovering from serious injuries. She did not come to Daniel's mansion because of his wealth. In fact, she knew almost nothing about his business empire. She simply saw a man who needed help. On her first morning, Daniel barely looked at her. He told her through his assistant that he did not want another nurse and that she would probably quit within a week. Emily listened without reacting. She checked his medication, adjusted the curtains, organized his therapy schedule, and quietly left the room. The next day, Daniel expected her to be gone. She returned. The third day, she returned again. Daniel began testing her. He deliberately refused breakfast. Emily waited. He rejected therapy. She patiently encouraged him. He told her she was wasting her time. She simply continued doing her job. One evening, during a terrible storm, Daniel finally lost control. He demanded that Emily leave the mansion immediately. He told her that people only stayed around him because of his money and that she was no different. He accused her of pretending to care because she wanted a wealthy patient on her record. Emily stood silently for several seconds. Then she looked at him and explained that she did not care about his money, his companies, or his reputation. She cared about the man sitting in front of her. She told him that losing the ability to walk had not made him worthless, but believing he was worthless was destroying him faster than his injury ever could. Daniel said nothing. That night, Emily found him sitting alone near the window. His eyes were red, and for the first time she saw something beneath his anger, fear. Daniel admitted that he was terrified. He was terrified that his life had ended, terrified that people pitied him, and most of all, terrified that if he allowed anyone close again, they would eventually leave. Emily did not promise that nobody would ever leave. Instead, she told him something much simpler: she would be there tomorrow. And she was. Slowly, things began to change. Emily convinced Daniel to return to physical therapy, not by promising miracles but by celebrating tiny victories. The first week, he managed to sit upright without assistance for several minutes. The next week, he completed an exercise he had refused to attempt for months. Daniel began keeping track of his progress. He started eating properly again. He opened the curtains in his bedroom. He even began speaking to his employees instead of hiding behind assistants. But just when life seemed to be improving, Daniel received devastating news. His company was collapsing. Several executives had secretly been moving money out of the business, believing Daniel was too emotionally broken to notice. His lawyers warned him that he could lose millions. The old Daniel would have exploded with rage. Instead, he asked Emily to help him sit at his desk. For the first time since the accident, Daniel returned to work personally. Days became weeks. With determination and the support of a small team he had learned to trust, Daniel uncovered the fraud. He saved the company, but something even more important happened during that battle. He realized he no longer wanted to spend his life proving that he was powerful. He wanted his life to matter. Months later, Daniel sold several luxury properties and used the money to establish rehabilitation centers for people who could not afford treatment. He funded scholarships for disabled children. He donated wheelchairs to rural hospitals. He began visiting patients himself. One afternoon, during the opening of his first rehabilitation center, a little boy in a wheelchair approached him. The boy looked nervous and asked Daniel whether he thought he would ever walk again. Daniel looked at his own wheelchair, then at the child. He smiled and told him that sometimes life does not give us the future we expected. But that does not mean it cannot give us a beautiful future. Emily stood several feet away, watching quietly. Daniel noticed her and smiled. Years earlier, he had believed the wheelchair was the end of his life. Now he understood that it had only been the beginning of a different one. That evening, Daniel returned home and asked Emily why she had refused to leave when he had given her every reason to walk away. She simply reminded him that someone had once needed to stay long enough for him to remember how to hope. Daniel looked toward the wheelchair beside him and realized something that money had never taught him. Sometimes the greatest wealth is not what you own, but who remains when you have nothing left to offer. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who needs a little hope, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness. Your support helps these stories reach people who may be silently fighting their own battles. And before you leave, comment, "I believe in second chances," if you believe that one person's kindness can change another person's life. Because sometimes, the person who seems impossible to reach is not asking for someone to fix their life. They are simply waiting for someone brave enough to stay. And sometimes, staying is the greatest act of love.